One of the challenges that atheist friends will sometimes throw out is, go on then, prove it. Give me evidence that God exists. And in fact, I recently did a short 60-second video on Instagram where in I think 60 seconds I went through about 14 different arguments for the existence of God in about 4 or 5 seconds each, which was quite an amazing challenge to do, probably without taking breath actually. And I did think it would be fun to kind of slow it down and dive a bit more deeply. So that's what we're going to do in this short answer video. Is there evidence that God exists? Well, if we have time, and even in this format we're limited, I can think off the top of my head of about 36 different arguments for the existence of God, but let's just pick a few of the biggies. One of the oldest ones, for example, is the cosmological argument, and that's well over 1,000 years old, and it hinges on the fact that, you know, science explains how stuff works, but we need to explain why there's stuff in the first place. You know, why does anything at all exist? In physics, for example, we would talk about the Big Bang, you know, standing at the beginning of the universe, but of course something has to explain the Big Bang, and if there's something behind the Big Bang, there's something behind that, and so on and so forth. And at some point, you need something that just exists, that doesn't require a cause for its existence. And if that doesn't look very much like God, I don't know what does. So the cosmological argument is taken very, very seriously in philosophy and has been around for a good long time, so that you could start there. Then you might move on to something called the fine-tuning argument, a more modern argument actually that arose in the 1970s. And it arose out of the observation that as physicists and cosmologists began studying particularly the laws of physics that underpin our universe, built into those laws of physics are some numbers. Take, for example, the gravitational constant. That's the number that determines how strong gravity is. Well, if that number was just an infinitesimal amount higher, then everything would have collapsed back in on itself after the Big Bang, and there would be no universe. If it was fractionally smaller, everything would have been thrown outwards. There would not have been time for galaxies and planets and stars to form, and there'd be nothing. That number is fine-tuned. And across physics, there are hundreds of examples of these kind of numbers. If they weren't precisely right, there would be nothing. Not merely no life, there'd be nothing. No stars, no galaxies, nothing. And the more you look at those numbers, the more you begin to realize the probabilities of those arising by chance are astronomical. And so someone like Fred Hoyle, very famous British atheist cosmologist, the guy who invented the term Big Bang, incidentally, Fred, in one of his last scientific papers, remarked, he said, the more I look at the laws of physics, the more it becomes apparent that a super intellect has monkeyed with the laws of physics and chemistry, and there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. And he was driven to that by the fine-tuning argument. Then we have more broadly the argument from design. You can apply that in biology. There are lots of features in biology that seem hard to explain purely by blind evolution grinding itself away. Perhaps the human brain would be a really good one of those. But perhaps more deeply in the argument from design lies the fact that underpin everything in nature, whether it's a mammal like a human being or a plant or whatever it is, everything in biology has DNA written into the cell of every part of its existence. Every living thing is built upon DNA. And DNA looks like a biological programming language. Many people have remarked upon that. It's an incredibly sophisticated biological programming language. And what we know about human programming languages like C or Python or so forth, tell us that languages are designed. They are very intricate information-bearing entities. And the fact that everything that lives in its DNA has this biological programming language written into it looks suspiciously like design. So there's the argument from design. Then we have things like the argument from mathematics. That's the observation that if numbers are just a human invention, how on earth do they plug so nicely into the laws of physics? You know, if numbers were just a human invention, something that Mesopotamian goat herders came up with around about the 2nd millennia BC to keep track of their goats, how on earth is it that numbers can map the curvature of space-time or probe the interior of black holes? Looks like a massively big coincidence, and that those goat herders got incredibly lucky. Then we have the argument from rationality, which says that actually it's almost impossible to even begin to conceive how we can get mind and rationality and reason from just blind particles. The very fact that we can think is a clue to something else going on. We have the argument from beauty, moving on, does seem to be that beauty is not just subjective. There is a deep, real quality to beauty. And the fact that as human beings we're wired to appreciate beauty. It's very hard to see how our desire to, listen to a beautiful Beethoven concerto or appreciate a work of art, how that offers much in the way of reproductive success. And so many thinkers have said there again is a clue that the universe is more than just the material. We have the argument from morality. It really does seem that some things are really, really wrong and some things are really, really right. Most ethicists down through history have said even if you could hypnotize every human being on the planet to believe that torturing children was okay, that wouldn't make torturing children okay. But the moment you kind of appeal to those moral absolutes, you need a moral absolute law giver. And again, there's a very powerful and ancient argument from morality, the existence of God. And then lastly, I would come in to land on Jesus. And I think the argument, especially from the resurrection, is an incredibly powerful historical argument you can run. And I'll put a link in the notes with this video to where we've gone into it in more detail on the Solas website. I think you can mount a very powerful, purely historical case for the resurrection, bodily resurrection of Jesus from the tomb 3 days after his death on a Roman cross. And if that stands up, not merely do you have a miracle, but that validates all of Jesus' claims and teaching about himself, not least his claim to be not just a human being, but God himself stepping into space and time and history. So that's just about 10 arguments for the existence of God. If we had a whole half hour, I could do another 24 or so for you. But I hope it's given you a flavour and a taste of the fact that Christians, thinking Christians, do not believe in God just because it's convenient. We don't just believe because we believe, but we believe not just on the basis either of just one argument, but a whole network of arguments that come together. But ultimately, we believe because of who Jesus was, claimed to be, and were demonstrated by his resurrection.